Welcome to Ask Dr. Change. I'm Dr. Linda Ackerman Anderson. I'm happy to have you join me today to explore how to seriously up-level your leadership and consulting to transformational changes, all through conscious change leadership. Welcome. Today's episode is about what's behind the power of our Leading Transformational Change online program. The question we have gotten about this program is, what is leading transformational change, and how did we come up with these 10 best practices? Why these 10 strategies, 5 people strategies and 5 change process strategies? They all go beyond conventional thinking, conventional change management, conventional project management. And we find them absolutely essential to the success of transformational change. Dean Anderson, my partner in life and business, and I created this program and these strategies based upon our 5 decades of work with all kinds of organizations, public and private sector. And so we want to introduce you to what's behind the strategies.
Yeah, and what's behind the strategies for me means after 50 years of doing work with leaders in organization transformation, what have we seen that has kind of made it obvious to us that these 10 strategies are required for success in organizational transformation? So we're not really here to talk about the how. I guess that's what the course does. But what we really want to do is kind of peel back the onion, if you will, take a deeper look inside what our history has revealed to us. Maybe tell some more stories, try to keep the names of the guilty out of it as much as we can. And look at really, the obvious, what became obvious to us around what's not working and what is working. And then how that, after 50 years of doing that action research, kind of rolled up into these 10 strategies.
So there's a lot of history behind what we're going to share with you today through our stories. And we want to let you know, if you want more information about leading transformational change, to go to beingfirst.com/LTC. And there's far more information there than we're going to share today, but we're going to give you the prompt about why this is such important work to succeeding at transformational change. So let's start. We're going to go back and forth between the people strategies and the change process strategies. Dean, the master of self-mastery.
I wouldn't say that, but I will say that it's been my focus for probably my whole life. And the most obvious thing I'll say me for sure, and I know for us as well, but if I can make it personal, is that there's a foundational life truth that mindset is causative. And so there's all kinds of events we experience out in the world. We see things go on, and then we make interpretations of what that means. We have a mindset that then has us see it a certain way. We make our decisions based on how we see it. And so the bottom line is that there's such an obvious realization that since mindset is causative, leaders building their own self-awareness and then their ability to manage their interior and then actually, lead themselves in their own personal change process is critical. And so for me, I just have so many different experiences. And, one that I'll share, and I'll actually use John Lobia's name because I just love John Lobia. And John Lobia was the CEO of Detroit Edison before they became DTE Energy. And we had the honor of helping that transition over, working with that company for 5 years. And I'll never forget one of the highlights of my career in those young days. And this is probably 20 some years ago. It would have been the late 90s. Oh my God, almost 30 years ago. It was the first Walk the Talk of Change course we'd ever delivered. And in the summary statement that I was giving about the course and the experience that the executive team had had for 4 days, John popped out of his seat like a little kid and said, I get it. I'm the actual reason that we're blocked in our strategy. It's the way I see things, right? And it was such a revelation that he had. And it was such a revelation for me 30 years ago. I was 40. And, I've been doing this already for 20 years. But the my point was that it was so profound to watch what happened to him personally and his whole executive team as they all began to wake up, that the fact that how they were seeing things was the primary block to their progress. And they were facing deregulation, and they had all kinds of issues with maybe their nuclear power plant being deregulated because of some safety issues. And, there's a long laundry list, like most executives carry, around challenges they were facing. But for them to look through all of those problems that they could be blaming the outside world as their limitation, to wake up to the fact that the outside world was just their circumstance. Yeah. How they are going to actually succeed mitigating or creating solutions to those challenges was all about how they were seeing it. And that was just something that I'll never forget. It was an honor to witness somebody's personal revelation in such a deep way, and so publicly.
Absolutely. So develop leader self-mastery is all about helping leaders see what they don't see and see themselves in action, so that they can alter what they're doing and what they're talking about and what they're deciding about in the moment. It gives them the power to do that.
Yeah.
So transformation really can't be led unless leaders see themselves in action and know what's required of them for the future.
Well, let me challenge that. It can be led. Just not very successfully.
Right. Okay.
Right. And so this first strategy of develop leader self-mastery is something that we would suggest you don't do it on the margins. Right. It actually has to become part of fundamental strategy, right? It's strategy number one in our approach. It has to be part of the effort.
Absolutely.
Right? You can send people to executive mindfulness courses or stress management courses or whatever. And that's one thing that's great, but it's a far different thing when you integrate it right into the transformation. So all the challenges they are facing are what they're working their own mindset issues through.
Yeah.
So it benefits not just them as leaders, but the project itself.
Yeah. So what you're leading into is that has to be a core part of the strategy for any transformation. Right. That leads us to the first of the 5 change process strategies, which is create a unified change strategy. And so this is very different than a project plan. This is a strategy that influences project planning. Now, what we've seen over and over and over again is how many clients have enabled a project team to jump into, give me the project plan, scope, schedule, budget, without any strategic guidance about what they are doing as leaders, as Dean has said, and what's happening for governance, for decision-making, for managing across projects, for scoping, so many factors. We realized once they jumped into project planning, they'd missed what we call so much of the upstream strategic work required to provide guidance.
Yeah.
We've seen it in utility and hospitals and banks, over and over and over again. They would come to us saying, we can't get off the dime. There's so many things we don't know about, and our sponsors haven't given us guidance. And so we sat back. How many times did we experience this? We sat back and we said, a whole new intervention is required here to effectively lead transformational change. And that is creating a change strategy. And change strategy has 12 different elements to it, that help shape guidance for the details of project planning.
Yeah, and I remember, working with NATO, and we had just a brilliant client there, Tony Johnstone Burt, and he was the Chief of Staff, Second Command of the Allied Transformation Group. And anyway, and he was such a brilliant man. And I remember talking to him when we first started with him, and I said, Tony, how are you going to? And then I was asking him, how are you planning on? Asking him some of the strategic questions. How are you going to govern? How are you going to get engagement? How are you going to integrate projects? How are you going, walking down many of the elements? And Tony said, well, we haven't addressed any of that. And I sat back and said, Tony, would you ever, as an admiral, 3-star admiral in the Navy, would you ever enter a battle without a strategy? Absolutely not. Well, do you think a business executive would ever enter a new business without a strategy? Absolutely not. Isn't this transformation one of the most, if not the most challenging things you've ever done, transforming NATO? He said, absolutely. I said, where's your strategy? done deal, right? And so that wake up about it, you can't just focus on diving in with your thinking around scope, schedule, budget. There's so many other strategic elements that shape how you address even scope, schedule, budget.
Right.
So anyway, this was a profound, again, awakening to have somebody so brilliant, right? So on their game, actually just see the wisdom of, we got to step back and be more strategic about how we go about transforming organizations. So what we've done is just said, okay, what are the 12 elements that are required for that? And that's what this piece is all about.
Yeah. It has taken on so much value for the clients that we serve to actually step back prior to really launch and create their strategy to give guidance to the project team. So lots to learn there.
Yeah.
Leading co-creatively.
So strategy number 3. Yeah. So this one, was kind of a slow burn for me in my younger days of saying, like, what's actually going on in the executive team that has this not be working? Why is it not coalescing, right? What's actually in the way? And there were some obvious things that showed up, which is the way the executives, who often had, back in those days, a long history with each other. In today's world of fast turnover, that's not quite, doesn't have, quite the kind of merit to it, that statement. But it's still true. We've got all kinds of histories, and we've got arguments, and we've had disagreements, and we've got little notches on our belt about, this is how you are, and therefore I don't really listen to you because this is how you are. And everybody's carrying those things. And what began to become very, very clear is that people didn't know how to collaborate. That was number one. But there was a bigger issue around co-creation. And what began to surface was that there wasn't a there that tied everybody together as one unified kind of group. And a metaphor would be, if all of a sudden the spaceships came up and these were the foreign aliens that were far more wise than us and had bigger weapons, and what would we do? Would we all go into our little political camps and, fight against how we're going to do this? No, we would align, just like NASA did when President Kennedy said, we're going to the moon. NASA was not a great agency, and because they were so myopic in their folks, they didn't talk to each other, they didn't collaborate. As soon as he made that declaration, boom, they came together.
Yep.
And so the realization was that leading co-creatively means that we're all aligned to something bigger than ourselves, and we're going to put that first. And I'll never forget, again, back in the work with Detroit Edison, another brilliant CEO that was just one of my favorite humans of all time. Tony Early called us when he was the president before he became the CEO, and it was after the Walk the Talk of Change retreat, maybe a month or two after. And Tony called, again, just excited as heck, right? And he says, Dean, I can't believe this happened. I said, well, what? And he tells me the story. And so Tony, he was the guy that all the EVPs would come sit before him and pitch their budget for the year. And he said, I had 2 EVPs donate multi-million dollars from their budget to this other EVP because they saw that his work in this calendar year was more important than their work to the larger big win we had just co-created. It's like mind-blowing, right? Where does that ever happen?
Really
but when they had the mindset that we had to put the thing we're all trying to achieve first, and they really were committed to it, well, then they would sacrifice their own myopic agenda to what was best for that. Yep. And that's just a brilliant thing.
Egos out of the way, part of the self-mastery work. These strategies build on each other. So they were able to set their egos aside, my budget, in order to give to what was larger and what they were all contributing to. That's great.
And so this whole strategy is, and how do you actually begin to set that up in an organization, right? That quality of being.
Yeah, and what it is, what it takes to actually step into that world. Yeah. So the next change process strategy is clarify governance, structure, and roles. Now, again, I want to say this is perhaps in every single project that we've ever engaged in. There's confusion about who does what, who's got authority for what, who's responsible for what, and so many things falling through the cracks from the lack of clarity, especially at launch. So clarifying governance, which has, there are 2 major pieces to this that we talk about in LTC. The first is the roles that are required from sponsor, project teams, project leaders, initiative leaders, consultants, etc. And so we talk about ensuring you have the right roles because they frequently aren't understood. And whether or not you tailor the names or the responsibilities or how many people you have, at least you're consciously attending to the work that requires oversight. It also involves good decision making. And so often we see we don't know how to make decisions, or we make decisions in the old state way, and it's not allowing us to, move into the future, especially if there's no co-creating happening. So decision making is conflicted because we're not all serving the same outcome.
Right.
So there are two major what we call paradigm shifts in this particular strategy. The first is setting up, out of all of those roles clarified, setting up a parallel governance structure. What that means is you have an ongoing operational structure running the organization, and you set up a change governance structure that runs in parallel. So a lot of leaders have to wear two hats. And we talk about the importance of the coordination between running operations and running the transformation. I'll never forget introducing this concept at an Army retreat. And I had, 100 officers and of all ranks in the audience. And I introduced the notion of a parallel structure. And one general in the front row turned to the side of his seat and crossed his arms and jutted his chin out and looked at me and said, "I don't believe in ad hocism." Like, wow, okay. So was this perceived as an ad hoc structure? And so it was insightful for me to understand how to share the power of being able to do both and two hats. Run the organization and run the change. And by the end of the program, exploring all of that, he was an advocate, fortunately, but that was insightful to me. The other major paradigm shift in this is the creation of the change process leader role, which is very unique in our approach to transformation. Consider the words change process leader. And so who designs the process of transformation from the very beginning all the way through sustained business benefits? We frequently think of identifying a project manager. Well, project management starts after a launch and ends at deployment. It's not the whole process, nor does it incorporate all the human dynamics that are required. We saw over and over and over again, no one's looking after the process. How are you doing this? Is it working? Is it not working? What's required for the people and the culture as well as the content? We created the change process leader role. And the Leading Transformational Change program goes in depth about what this is, what it requires, and how to set it up. Many examples about successfully identifying a line leader, not a human resources person, a line leader to be the change process leader and orchestrate the transformation in all ways required.
Yeah, and it leads us into the next strategy for me. You're triggering a story for me that ties these two things together. So the next strategy is all about leading. It is leading, but ensuring leaders are committed and aligned, but it's leading leaders into that realization. And I remember tying this to, governance is I remember working with one of the biggest cities in Canada. And you weren't on this project, so it was me working with the HR group, and they were trying to transform HR. And when I started we did a 3-day, our on-site version of LTC, the old Leading Transformation course. And in the middle of that, I started to ask questions around how they're integrating with other projects in the organization. Well, come to find out, their HR transformation was about moving towards centralized support services, where they were integrating literally IT, communications, HR, and finance. And they were going to have software to do all of that, including IT. And I said, well, where are the other project teams? Well, they're all doing their own thing, right? And their whole upset was about how there was lack of alignment across these groups. Well, they had no structure, no process, no clear governance, nothing. And so how are they ever going to get leader alignment? And so that was a graphic example of the need for both those things. But what I'll say, kind of where it led us over years was, What we do now is we roll out what we call an expedition day. So after we've done the work with leaders to get them aligned in terms of them working on their own personal issues around self-awareness and mindset, as they begin to become more co-creative and they create their vision for their organization, if it's a revisioning the company or they're actually launching their transformation, either of those two things. How do you then get the rest of the organization aligned? And the idea of an expedition day is then to roll all of that out in a high engagement way that then has people realize, because this is a declaration from the front of the room, we're all in this together. And again, it's that two bills on your hat orientation where I still have my functional role, but flip my hat around. I have a change leadership role.
Right.
And given my sphere of influence and my position and where I live in the organization, I have a responsibility for making this transformation successful. Just like if I was in NASA when Kennedy says we're going to the moon, no matter where I am in that agency, what's my role to make that happen?
Yeah.
And I'm as equally responsible to that as everything else I do.
Yeah.
And so this whole idea of building leader alignment, it goes contrary to what leaders usually do, which is they kick it all over the fence to either the project management team to drive it or the change management team to handle the people issues or whatever it is, a little group of 12 subject matter experts to push this new agenda in the organization. That doesn't work. And it doesn't work because pushing our big agendas in the 21st century requires everybody to be aligned to it so they can contribute. And so this, for me, is a real pivotal strategy. Yeah. And I believe, quite honestly, that without this being a very forefront strategy, your chance of success is minuscule. And another quick example of that is the idea when in an organization that's unionized, if you have, labor relation issues and you've got a history of union and management fighting, how do you ever expect to transform?
Right.
It has to be done as a partnership.
Right.
And so how do you build that partnership for the sake of that big win?
Right.
And so there's a lot to this strategy.
Absolutely. I don't know how many times we get far enough into a project and the leaders sit there and we're attempting to have them go in one direction and they look at each other and say, I didn't sign up for that.
Right.
I didn't think that that's what this meant.
Right.
And it's like, there it is, the lack of really understanding the impacts, which is an underlying requirement.
Yeah. And 6 months earlier, when the project was launched, all the executives said, yeah, that's a great idea. And then 6 months later, when the project team's marching through their functional area saying, we need to get your people engaged in this way, they go, wait a minute, we're too busy here.
Right.
It's like, wait, you agreed to this. Right. Well, I didn't agree to this.
Right.
I agreed that you guys go do it. I didn't agree for me to actually participate.
Right. What a difference it makes when you actually do get full commitment and alignment across leadership or among all of the project
It's the only way.
Huge.
It's the only way.
Huge.
You can't unleash the human potential in the organization without people aligned.
Absolutely. Well, I've already mentioned the importance of process. So the next strategy is consciously designing your change process from the very beginning to sustained business benefits. So project management comes in with the process, which is very effective and needed to identify the right solution and get it deployed. It doesn't start at the beginning of the insight of we need to make this change happen or end at achieving results. Change management typically comes in to address the people dynamics, but it doesn't start at the beginning influencing leaders in their ability to lead or ending up so frequently with beyond, adoption to really achieving results. So we need a process that starts at the very beginning and ends all the way through the sustainment of business results. The one that we use and have designed is the Change Leaders Roadmap, a 9-phase model that does all of that with a particular emphasis on the upstream part. We call it upstream, midstream, and downstream. At the upstream part where so many decisions get made, the change strategy is made and governance is clarified and the outcomes are identified with attention to the process of upstream requirement. So many examples of the absence of upstream attention that's required. And so consciously designing the process is not just what do we need to do with all of these things, but what are the implications of where leaders are Are they for? Are they against? Do they participate? Are they aligned? And so looking at all of the human dimensions, as well as for stakeholders, all the human dimensions as you design the steps required to go from A all the way to Z. So it's not just action planning, the tactical. It really is looking at the dimensions, the human dimensions of culture and mindset and behavior, as well as the work that's required to get the project moving ahead effectively. Really essential to having a good process.
Yeah. And so what I'm hearing in the way you're describing process is what it means is how do you integrate everything so that it's not piecemeal? And so, if you got scope, schedule, budget as the orientation is very tactical, well, how do you integrate strategy?
Yeah.
If you're focused on content, right, we got to get the right solution, and you put your 12 subject matter experts together and they come up with a solution, and then you hand it off to an implementation team. Well, that's not integration.
Right.
Or if you're thinking about content and you don't even think about people until you've got the design, and then you kick it over to change management to go deal with the resistance,
right,
which naturally occurs, by the way, when smart adults are left in the dark about what's going on, right? And so, but you don't have an integrated process around content and people, and you don't have an integrated process around engagement and communication happening right from the start and carrying all the way through, right? It's all piecemeal. That doesn't work in transformation. It just fundamentally doesn't work. And so the idea of a conscious process design, right? It means I'm putting all these things together.
Yep. Yeah. And able to see it.
All right. So next is directly addressing culture. I'm going to start off with a story.
Okay.
This was another one of those landmark moments in my own career. And I've told you this story a couple times, but it was years ago, and maybe it was a couple decades ago. I got a call from a CEO of a big ag business in Canada. And it's a business most people would know. And the CEO says, hey, we're on the phone. Not Zoom. Didn't have Zoom then. We're on the phone. And CEO says, hey, I hear you guys are, pretty expert around culture change. And I said, well, thanks for the compliment. But yeah, that's what we do. We're pretty good at it. And he said, well, can you tell me what the best culture should be for me to install? And I kind of went, dude, it doesn't work that way. Yes, there are qualities of culture that seem to be, right, pretty foundational, like empowering humans, having a level of trust and openness in your communication, engaging people so they can contribute. But you can't just install that because it's a good idea. The only way culture changes is when you engage your executive team, then along with your rest of your organization over time in the conversation about who are we and who do we want to be? And who do we want to be because it's vital to being that from the inside out. And our market is actually asking of us of this. We have to step up, like more customer service as an example. And so the point about this was how absurd that question was, right? And here's this guy, he's making lots of money because he's running this business that's quite large and very successful. He doesn't have a clue about addressing culture. And so it was a sidebar to him. There's something you just plug and play, as opposed to what we've come to discover over these years is culture is a part of everything.
Absolutely.
There's nothing in the organization that culture doesn't touch. And so that we have to directly address it, and how, and it's back to what you were just talking about an integrated change process. It's not something where you work on content and then you think about people and, oh, by the way, how's our culture in the way or supportive, but rather what's the cultural component and interface that's going to enable us to succeed in this, and how do we amplify it? How do we actually begin to see the limitations in our culture so we can put into our change process efforts to actually move the culture forward?
Absolutely.
And as part of the change.
And have strategies, specific strategies to do so.
That's right. Not as an adjunct later, but as an integral part right from the beginning.
Right. I just want to briefly add to another story about this. I was working with a defense contractor, and their charge was to rapidly accelerate the production of fighter jets. And I
remember this project.
Yeah. And I did an assessment of, current state, what's going on, how would we shape a change strategy to support them to do this? And I met with the executives of that part of the organization and began sharing some of the strategic elements. And I had recognized in the organization a massive conflict between engineering, who were designing what had to happen for the new fighter jets, and production, manufacturing to produce the jets on the production line. They didn't talk to each other. They didn't like each other. They wouldn't work with each other. And so I'm meeting with the executives, and I said, so there definitely has to be a cultural aspect to our strategy here. And the executive, the chief financial officer, just threw up his arms and he said, "We don't deal with that namby-pamby, touchy-feely culture stuff. We have no place for that in this organization." I got, deer in the headlights, wide-eyed. It's like, wow. Yeah. And so I stepped back.
Maybe you ought to change your mindset.
Took a deep breath and said, "Okay, I got it. What we need to do is figure out a strategy to get the engineering organization to work better with the manufacturing organization, the production line, because right now they don't work well together." And he looked at me and he said, "Can you fix that? We need to fix that." And I was like, okay, don't mention the C word, but do the work, right?
But at least he got to the point of do the work, right? And that's the point, is that in every project, there are cultural impairments, just like there are cultural benefits.
Yeah.
So how do you leverage the latter and begin to mitigate the former, right?
Awesome. So next up is set up conditions for success. So every leader would want the right conditions in place to have a transformation go effectively. My story around the actual creation of this strategy took place at Pacific Gas and Electric, huge utility. And this was very early in my days, where they were going through a massive transformation, altering how they delivered service and moving from...
Let me interrupt. Let's put a time frame on this.
Okay, right.
You began to see insight 80s. Into this 40 some years ago.
This is the early 80s. See this gray hair?
Yeah.
It started then.
So this wasn't 3 years ago.
No, this is a long time ago. Anyway, so they were going from 60 different districts to 6 different divisions. Major changes in a lot of the mechanisms there. And we wanted to identify an executive, a leader to lead this. At the time, we called it a transition leader. Today, it would be a change process leader. And so the man who was in charge of the largest district, he was 3 years from retirement. He volunteered to step out of his role, open it up for development of someone else, and take on this transformation and how to orchestrate it. Day one, he had a job we opened up an office for him at corporate headquarters. Day one, I walked into his office and I looked at him, and written all over his face was buyer's remorse. Like, what did I get myself into? I don't know how to do this. And I said to him, "Vern, you've been through changes throughout this entire organization for your whole career. I mean, you're ready to retire. You know how this organization works. What would we have to have in place to have this actually succeed?" Mm-hmm. A light went on in his eyes that never went off. He was one of the most extraordinary change leaders I have ever worked with. And he said, "You mean we could actually do that?" And I said, "Why would we not?" And so,
why would we set ourselves up for failure?
Really, he said, "I can identify a lot of stuff, but this is how good a leader he was." He said, "I want to put together a team and ask them what they see." Mm-hmm. And so we put together a project team, and we met with them to help launch them. And we asked them the question, what are the factors that have to be in place, the conditions that have to be in place for this to succeed? And we made this great list. It was very energized. And they said, "These are so important. We need to make a poster of them and hang them on the wall." And we said, "Great." And so we made a poster and hung them on the wall. And about a month later, things started to fall through the cracks. And I met with the team and I said, "What happened to your conditions for success?" And to a person, they all looked at the poster on the wall and said, there they are on the wall. And we realized they hadn't done any work to inform anybody, to establish them, to get agreement, permission, to license, to resources, the whole bit. Yeah. So the conditions for success strategy is not just identify them, it's actually establish them, monitor them, and sustain them, which ultimately is what we did there.
And so let me just add to that is, so that whole poster on the wall thing is so classic, right? About everything. Cultural norms. Where are your cultural norms? They're on the wall. Well, are you living them? Right. No, we don't live them. We just put them on the wall.
Right.
But the point that I'm taking from, the Vern story is that the effort to actually install, bring into being your conditions for success has to be part of your change process.
Right.
So now it's actually not, again, outside of it, just like we don't put culture outside or people outside. It's all integrated in the change process.
Right.
And so the strategy of setting up conditions for success are one of the key things you do in phase 1 of the Change Leaders Roadmap. And then you can say, okay, how are we going to put them in place? And now that gets factored into your change process. Right. So change teams and everybody else you're engaging are all doing the work of that, just like you're doing the work of engaging people, just like you're doing the work of culture change right from the beginning through this whole massive effort that actually brings it to fruition so you're successful.
Yeah.
What a novel idea.
Yeah. Powerful. Very powerful.
Yeah.
So
next,
yes.
Move on. Okay, engage stakeholders to maximize commitment. So this is, again, one of the key strategies. And I guess I would just kind of led into that with my last statement, which is it's not something in our world that you do later, you do it from the beginning. And so one of the core pieces of building a comprehensive change strategy is ask the strategic question, who are the stakeholders we need to engage given the scope of the effort, and how are we going to engage them, and when, and what vehicles, et cetera. And one of the fundamental understandings around building commitment in an organization is that you don't sell commitment. You do have to do that. Here's what we're doing. Here's why it's benefit. That's the sales job. Hope you actually approve. Hope you agree. Hope you'll contribute. But then there's the actual put people to work. And that's how commitment is built. Because a lot of people will carry a conditional commitment, like the executive story earlier. Yeah, I buy into that. Let's go do that change. But then 6 months later, the change team walks through their organization. No, we don't have time for you. And where's the commitment?
Right.
And so the idea of engaging people is not just communication where you're telling them what we're doing and then maybe selling them off the idea, but actually finding a way for them to contribute.
Yeah.
Because when people contribute and they have their own fingerprints on something, they begin to integrate the reasons why it's so important to be building this thing.
Right.
Plus, they got their fingerprints on the building. So now it's their building. And so there's various psychological and actual practical reasons to engage people early. And again, I want to highlight that this means finding a way for them to do something that supports the effort, rather than just telling them. And the metaphor for me is always, where do you want the maximum number of people? Do you want them in the stands watching the game?
Yeah.
Or do you want them on the playing field actually playing and contributing to the outcome of the game?
Yeah.
And the latter is the answer. And the challenge is sometimes that's hard, right? Because it's easier to say, just the 12 of us smart subject matter experts, we'll figure it out, we'll push it, we'll drive it. And everybody else then sits in the stands and judges what you're doing. And generally you're keeping them in the dark.
Yeah.
So now they have negative judgments because they don't know what's going on. So they always make up the worst story. So the boogeyman is in this project, bad things are going to happen. But as soon as you bring them onto the field, now they have line of sight to what's happening. They got their fingerprints on it. They're inputting good ideas, and now it's theirs.
Yep.
And so when you do this strategy well, by the time you get to midstream, where you're upstream design, midstream implementation, by the time you get to implementation, downstream, upstream planning, midstream design, and downstream implementation, by the time you get to implementation, people are saying, move out of the way, we got this.
Yep.
Right, as opposed to dealing with resistance. And so this is the way you maximize commitment and minimize resistance.
Two things that I want to share here. One of the most important things we've learned is that a lot of leaders believe they've engaged stakeholders with their big launch communication. Mm-hmm. For us, engagement is task driven. The Change Leaders Roadmap in all 9 phases has all kinds of tasks, multitudes, where stakeholders can have a contribution.
Right.
And so learning enough about the various tasks from planning, design, impact analysis, implementation, sustainment, etc. There are all kinds of things your stakeholders can do. So really, really important.
Yeah.
The other thing I want to mention is
what is that other thing?
Is that there is another episode in this podcast on creating critical mass. And what Dina's just described in talking about engaging your stakeholders and where they sit, supportive, on the fence, or against, has everything to do with creating your critical mass strategy. Yeah. So find that episode, and it's very insightful for actually doing what you're talking about.
Yeah, and I'll add one more thing, that it speeds things up.
Absolutely.
So the mentality, the old mindset that is basically misinformed, is that if we engage people, it slows things down.
Yeah.
But it actually doesn't. When you engage people, well, let me step back. What's the slowest thing that can occur is when you deal with resistance.
Yep.
And so often, many change projects get designed well. They even might get implemented, but they don't get sustained because there's never the overcoming of that resistance. So people just don't use the new thing that was installed, as a good example.
Yep.
And so that means it never actually gets to the finish line. So that's pretty slow. But when we get people engaged, basically resistance goes away because their commitment gets built by the engagement. And so this is a great acceleration strategy.
Absolutely. So the 10th strategy we want to introduce you to is establishing a course correction mindset and system. So understanding transformational change and how emergent it is, how messy it is, there's so much that we're figuring out as we go. It does not fit a classic project plan from here to there. It's not the nature of transformation. So in order to succeed, we need active and frequent course correction in order to see what's working, what's not working, what we need. So the first time I actually introduced this major electronics manufacturing organization, so working with the leader, major change effort, and we got him to realize, I need to make a course correction in how we're launching. And he did. And it was in a major communication. And in the audience, there was this incredible ripple. And what we heard were people saying, "You're changing again? You don't know what you're doing. Well, who's leading this thing? There's no leadership here. And you haven't figured it out." And what we realized in that moment is we hadn't ever established the expectation for the need for course correction and the organizational cultural norms and mindset that course correction is a positive move in leading transformational change. So engaging everybody to be able to identify where we need to do things differently around the future state design or the process, how we're dealing with people, and having them safely raise those issues is a positive contribution. It's not a statement that we don't know what we're doing. It's that we're figuring it out as we go. It's what I call getting smarter by the day.
Yeah. So if I can just ground that statement for a minute, Lindy, is that, when you make it real, and people understand that transformation is nonlinear, right? It isn't a straight line, which means there's going to be multiple of these.
Yeah.
And when they got that mindset, and then you actually put a system in place and a process, and in today's world, technology to back it, which means, okay, now we agree, we're all co-creating this together. We're all early warning signal potentials, right? So we're all got our eyes, we call them scouts, right? We all got our eyes on what's happening. And so if a condition for success goes awry, or if we get new data because some stakeholder group now has a different agenda than we thought, or resistance levels go up, that all that gets fed into the system. Now, in today's world, again, technologically makes it very easy. But then we've got a team that looks at that data. Hey, we got a course correction that brings it to the change leadership team. And in every change leadership team meeting, part of the agenda is there any new information that requires us to adjust course?
Yep.
And so now when all that's in place, when those natural things arise, they just get handled. And everybody goes, God, these people are smart. Look how they handle all the issues. And so now you build credibility, right?
Yeah,
as opposed to who's leading this thing, right?
Right.
Anyway.
Awesome.
Yeah.
So we hope that we've communicated with you how much Dean and I have to share about all of these strategies that we have found so profoundly impactful on the success, especially of transformational change. So we want to talk with you a little bit about finding out more about this. There's a link in the podcast. Going to beingfirst.com/LTC, standing for Leading Transformational Change. That's where much more information about the course. It's an online course that runs over 12 weeks, 1 day a week. Lots more information about the details of it at that link.
The bottom line is what you're offering to people to, come to this course. So just a little bit about this course is that, the 10 strategy course, Leading Transformational Change, is really the foundation to this body of work.
Yes.
Right? If somebody's interested in conscious change leadership and how you lead an organization through transformation, there's a foundational understanding. And the reason that we put this course together is because our other offerings historically have all touched on these things, but never wrapped them into a package.
Yeah.
And so the idea of this course is that we want folks to have the foundation of what these 10 strategies are, and then dive deeper into the paradigm shifts that are required to actually implement them, and how they actually, in their implementation, begin to shift the paradigm in the organization.
Yeah.
And so that right there is what is the foundational equipment, if you will, for any conscious change leader. Because if we don't know these strategies and how to work with them, then we're going to fall into the same holes, the potholes that we were falling into years ago, until we began to see what is now so obvious to us.
Absolutely. So the program is highly interactive. It's case applied. You're bringing your live work here, working with people literally around the world who are working on, thinking about, learning about, sharing their experiences around executing and tailoring these 10 strategies for the success of their transformations. At this time, we're beginning a new LTC starting in September. Because you listen to this podcast, we're extending the early bird 20% discount to you via a special coupon code. That's Dr. Change, DRCHANGE, Dr. Change. This coupon code is good through September 6th because the course begins on September 17th. The discount rate for government remains at 25% at all times. And the discount rate for nonprofits and NGOs is always 30%. We have a 2-tiered group discount process as well for 3 or more or 6 or more people. So we hope you will consider this for your own work. And Dean and I hope to see you on September 17th. Thanks for spending some time with me today. I hope you gained some valuable insights for your work. Please send me your questions and challenges by going to askdrchange.com.